for part 2 of the promised discussion on the subject of growth. So we touched on some of the elements in the panel meeting, but I'm going to go now through a little bit more in-depth investigation into the subject of growth, the problems that some companies have in achieving profitable growth, some of the reasons for that, some of the new ways that people are finding to think about growth, and the implications of that for the way that we think about positioning businesses and marketing those businesses. And the subject that I'm going to focus on is this, the growth paradox. So I'm sure you all know what a paradox is. It's when two seemingly contradictory things are simultaneously true. So if you say something tastes bittersweet, or you've got to be cruel to be kind, or spend now, save later, those things are paradoxes. The growth paradox is this. So growth is really important. There's many pieces of work have been done analyzing the factors most associated with business success, and time again, the very smart people who do these analyses conclude growth is the single most important factor. McKinsey did a big piece of work a few years ago, and they came to that conclusion. They had a lovely phrase. They said, growth is magic. And what they meant by that is, if a company is growing, everything else works. Your top line is moving forward, your gross profit is moving forward, your unit profitability, your return on investment tend to be better, your relationships with suppliers and distributors is better, your people are more motivated and happy, your share price is better, and there's a direct correlation between CEO tenure and growth in companies as well. If your company's growing, CEO stays in his job longer. So it's really, really important. And most people in business would accept that. The paradox, though, is this. Although growth is really, really important, and every CEO I've ever talked to would agree with that, the fact is most companies are pretty bad at delivering growth. Now, you might think, rubbish, that's not true. Most companies are actually quite good at it. So I'm just going to quote you a few of the people who've looked at this issue, and you might be surprised at some of the stats that they've independently come up with. Here's three quotes to illustrate that point. This guy, Chris Zook, he's a writer, he's written a lot of really good books, he's a consultant, he's done all sorts of things, and he says 99 of 100 management teams fail to meet investors' growth expectations. 99 out of 100, to me, that is a phenomenal number. Now, maybe you could say that's because investors' expectations are too aggressive, but nevertheless, that's a big number. Here's somebody else, nothing to do with each other. A guy called James Allen, he's written a load of books as well, and he did a really interesting piece of work where he took 10 years worth of business results from 2000 to 2010 in the US, Europe, and Asia, and he compared the results that companies delivered to the numbers they put in their annual reports, so what they said they were going to deliver. And he found that whereas about 83% of companies hit their profit numbers, their bottom line, 90% of them failed to hit the top line numbers they put in their annual reports. 90%. And that tells you something about the relative importance that companies have between growth and profit. The third sort of witness for the prosecution is Bain. In my opinion, the best of all the big consultant companies. Bain did a big piece of work a few years ago. They looked at all the factors associated with business success. They concluded growth was the most important. And they said, even in the best of times, 9 out of 10 management teams fail to grow their companies profitably. So that's just 3 pieces of evidence. There's lots more out there. But to me, it's remarkable that it's so consistent and so many companies fail to grow sustainably and profitably. So that raises the question, well, why is that then? And I'm going to suggest to you there are 2 reasons, and we'll look at each of them separately. The first is, I would say, the reason that most companies are so bad at growing sustainably is because companies don't really take growth seriously. And the second reason is that, partly as a result of that, most companies, certainly all the companies that I've worked for, great companies and companies I've been associated with, all make a common big mistake, a big fundamental mistake about how we go about choosing brands, and that leads them to fail to grow. Now, we'll take each of these in turn and see what you think, whether you agree with me or not. We're going to start with this one. Nobody takes growth seriously. So again, that probably doesn't feel very, very accurate or very comfortable. So let's just examine it. So I'm going to get you to help me with this, okay? So this is a chance for you to understand the extent to which your company takes growth seriously. So all I need you to do is put your hands up, put your hands down. So tell me this, first of all, hands up if in your company, on your senior executive team, whatever you call it, hands up if you've got a finance director on your senior executive team. Wow, okay, that's everybody, okay. Hands up if you've got a marketing director or a CMO, whatever you might call it, on your senior team. Okay, that's pretty much everybody. How about this one? HR or people director? Yep, okay. IT, who's got somebody for that? IT, not so many, but still most, okay. How about this one? Who's got one of these? Good, which company? Chief Revenue Officer, okay. What's your company? Okay. So even in this room, 2 hands compared to pretty much everybody for all of the others. Isn't that interesting? That this subject, which is so important, companies commonly don't have anybody who's really responsible for it. Now, my company did a piece of work. We looked at top 100 consumer companies across the world. And while you can't always tell exactly what job titles stand for, we found one senior guy. Here he is. This is Tim Kotha, and he's the Chief Growth Officer at Mondelez. That's the only one we could find. Maybe there were others. Maybe we didn't quite understand job titles. But we could only find one of the top 100. And that, to me, is remarkable and tells you something remarkable about the way that companies approach growth. The challenge is, if you haven't got somebody in that position, so who's accountable for growth then? Who's responsible for developing the plans and getting the resources and implementing and make sure it's working? Perhaps more pertinently, how confident would you feel in delivering your bottom line numbers if you didn't have a finance director? How confident would you feel that the computer systems would all work if you didn't have an IT director? Or how confident would you feel that the training programs if you didn't have an HR director? And yet, we're all happy to work in companies that don't have a growth director. And I think that matters. I think if you haven't got somebody in that position, the risk you take is this. It means that you probably won't have a properly thought through growth strategy. You'll have budgets and targets, but that isn't the same as a properly thought through growth strategy. You're quite likely not to have adequate resources allocated for growth. Why? Because when you come to the annual debate about where the money's going to get allocated, who's speaking up for growth as a subject? Probably nobody. You probably haven't got effective growth metrics. You'll have backward-looking metrics that tell you what's our sales, what's our market share, but you won't probably have metrics that tell you, are you likely to grow in the future? And most importantly, I would say you're less likely to have a real understanding of what it takes in your market to grow. So I think there are serious consequences to this organizational lack of focus on this key position. And all of those things contribute to this, something that I call the big growth mistake. This is a common mistake about how we all, as consumers, go about making decisions on what to buy and which brands to choose. This mistake has been made by every company that I've worked for and every company that I've been associated with, and it stops companies growing. Here's the mistake. The working assumption that most companies make is that whatever category you're in, on any given day, there's a certain number of purchases out there, and what you have to do is to grab as many of those purchases as you can, and if you grab more than your competitor, you'll grow. If he grabs more than you, he grows. The assumption is those purchases are there, you've got to go and get them. That's a fundamental mistake, in my view. The problem with that assumption is that it leads to commercial plans that look like this. Very busy, very complex, very expensive. Promotions on all the time. Advertising campaigns that chop and change because are they working, they're not working, let's change our advertising. Expensive loyalty programs, effectively paying your customers to stay with you. You know, lots of new initiatives getting pumped out in case it was that lack of a fourth perfume or a fifth size that was really the reason that people were not buying you. And often, companies becoming really, really dependent upon price or promotions to drive short-term sales. And those commercial plans, they're often complex and expensive. They often also don't work. And they ignore three really important truths, which I would suggest are these. The truth is, in almost every market that you're in, most consumers are unlikely to buy you very often. Most purchases are not really available to you profitably, and most of what you're doing in your commercial plans probably doesn't matter an awful lot. And here's why. The way that we operate, all of us, and we can't help it, is when we're deciding what to buy in any category, we're shopping from a small portfolio of favorite brands. I call them autopilot brands. They're brands that we've chosen subconsciously, so we're often not aware of choosing them or why we've chosen them. We bond with them emotionally. We show intense loyalty. You heard about some of those autopilot brands from the panel earlier. And once we've chosen one of these brands, we give it all of our business. We don't kind of know why. We don't really think about it. But all the data says autopilot brands will get 75 to 90% of purchases in every category. We're very reluctant to change those brands. And importantly, we actively screen out attempts by other brands to attract our attention and to attract our business. We can't help doing it. It's just the way that we're wired as human beings. Now, often at this point in the discussion, I can sense a level of growing cynicism in the room. People saying, well, that's not how I behave. I'm extremely rational. I evaluate all my purchases. I decide what to buy. Rubbish. I don't work on autopilot at all. I think you do. Here's a little example that I'm going to give you. See if this rings true or not. So think about the answer to this question. How many television channels have you got on your television at home? Who wants to give me a number? 600. Wow. 600? That's a lot. Okay. That's, 150 to 600. That's a decent number. And how many do you watch? How many account for, say, 75% of your viewing?
I download most of the things I watch.
Three. Typically, the answer to that, what most people say is 150 to 200 channels, and I watch 3 or 4. If it's me, I watch BBC One, BBC Two, Sky Sports. That's what I watch all the time. So why is that? It doesn't kind of make sense that at any point in time, it must be that somewhere on those 150 channels, there's something that I would probably enjoy more than what I'm watching on BBC One, BBC Two, and Sky Sports, but I never go there. And that's because at some point, subconsciously, my brain has decided that's a waste of time. Don't waste your time doing that. You're quite happy with these channels. They've become my autopilots. And every time I sit down in front of that television, that's where I go. And if that's behavior that we commonly exhibit, where checking alternatives is as easy as flicking with a remote control, how much more likely is it that we're going to exhibit that same behavior in the much more complex world of choosing which products to buy in a supermarket or walking down a high street and deciding where to go shopping? And the point is, there's nothing we can do about this. It's how we're wired. Now, a little bit of science to explain this. Just a couple of slides. This guy's Daniel Kahneman. So Daniel Kahneman, you've probably heard of him. He won the Nobel Prize for Science in 2002 for breakthrough understandings of how our brains work. And his key insight was there are two systems in our brain. System one, a subconscious, largely emotional brain, and system two, our conscious, rational brain. We're not aware of system one, it's subconscious. So when we think about us thinking, it's system two that we're talking about. And they're very different. Here's system one. It's intuitive and emotional, not very rational at all. It's super fast and effortless. It's working all the time. You can't feel the effort. And it's got huge data processing capability. System two is very different. It's rational and evaluatory. It's us thinking. It's slow and effortful, and it's got much more limited data processing. Now, because we're all rational and because we're all working in big rational organizations, we sort of assume that we and all of our customers operate mainly through rational evaluatory system two. And that's just wrong. Actually, about 95% of all the decisions you ever take are taken subconsciously through system one, and only about 5% through system two. So that's a little bit of science, and just a couple of quick examples, again, to sort of address any sort of cynicism in the room about, I don't really think that's how things work. Two little examples that will illustrate how your brains are working and will show why this autopilot behavior that I'm suggesting is just an inevitable consequence of our biology. So here's the first exercise. So this is really simple. This is an exercise for your conscious brain. All I want you to do is to read across the rows. You can do it out loud or do it to yourself. and I want you to say what the color really is, okay? So the first one is not yellow, it's green, okay? So just do that across the rows and do it as quickly as you're able to do it. Okay, so it's quite difficult, isn't it? It's a surprisingly difficult exercise to do. Probably some of you made mistakes and had to sort of stop, hold on, is it yellow? What is the right answer? Is it yellow or green? Some of you probably had to sort of go back and start again, and you probably found as you went through, it got harder. You started to get a little bit tired. That's an illustration of the limitations of your conscious brain. That's a very simple binary task. Is it yellow or is it green? And if it's that difficult for your conscious brain to cope with that task without getting tired, how much more difficult would it be if when you went into a supermarket, you had to make all of those purchase decisions consciously? You have to remember all the brands you want, all the advertising you've ever seen about them, all the experiences that you've had, what your friends said, all the new products in store, you just wouldn't be able to do it. So this helps to explain why the vast majority of our brand choice decisions are taken by our subconscious brains, not by our conscious. We just couldn't cope with life any other way. The second point related to this autopilot habit is once our subconscious brains have made a decision, made a choice, they're very stubborn. They don't like to be contradicted by our conscious brains. And here's an example to illustrate that. So this, many of you will have seen this. This is called the Muller-Lyer illusion. And so the question is, which is the longer line? Same? Yeah, they are the same. So you've all seen this before. They are the same length. Okay. And by the way, this is my slide. I've measured them. They are exactly the same length. Exactly the same. So look at them again. They are exactly the same. Which one looks longer? No, I just told you they're the same. I've measured them. They are the same. Okay. Have you got that? They're the same length. Look at them again. Which one looks longer? So isn't it weird? So we all know they are the same length, and yet we cannot see them as the same length. And the reason for that is because all through our lives, we've been using these little shortcuts, the neuroscience world calls them heuristics, which enable us to manage through life. And one of those heuristics is an indicator of greater length is outward-facing things, and an indicator of less length is inward-facing things. And because we've been using that heuristic all of our lives, and it's proved very useful to us, our subconscious brain will not give it up. So even when your conscious brain, as it just did, said, hold on, you're wrong, they are the same length, your subconscious brain says, I'm sorry, I'm not accepting that. As far as I'm concerned, the top one is longer, and that's how I'm going to make you see it. And that little example shows when the two come into conflict, the subconscious brain nearly always wins. And it illustrates the problem of brands persuading people to change. Once you've made your autopilot decision subconsciously, brands will, we are very reluctant to change because our subconscious brain is in charge. So, the key to growth, and the thing that many, many companies do, is you must learn how to become the autopilot choice in your category. If you do that, you'll grow. If you don't, you will struggle. But it's difficult. Choices are made subconsciously. They're mainly driven emotionally, and we're not very good at those things. But there is a key to autopilot choice. There are certain moments which in every category are the moments when we make these choices. And they're moments when the performance of the product or service is disproportionately emotionally important. They're called the moments of maximum emotional impact, or MOMIs. And the brands that succeed are the ones that understand these moments and build propositions around them. Now, to illustrate, I'm going to give you 3 examples, and you'll get what I mean. Here's the first one. So Lynx is a very well-known deodorant product. It's targeting young men predominantly. And Lynx has come to understand of all the times that its target audience uses deodorant, there's just one moment when they care at all, really, about whether that product is working or not. There's a really emotionally important moment. What's that moment?
When you meet a girl.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? So Lynx have understood that that demographic doesn't care at all whether the deodorants work in the rest of the time, but they do care in these moments. They really care. And they've built a proposition around that. They don't compete with the rest of the category on long-lasting or triple lock or extra dryness. They ignore all those things that the rest of the category does, and they say, we understand our consumers care passionately about this moment, So we're going to give them products that are chunky and masculine, exotic fragrances, and we're going to run this advertising which is saying, look, we understand what's important to you and we're on your side. And they've grown hugely. Uber. So Uber, you all know Uber, fantastic. They're targeting young urban professionals, really. What's the emotionally important moment that Uber have managed to build a proposition around? Want to go home? Yeah. What's the emotion associated with those moments when you want to get somewhere quickly?
An urgency.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of worry. So this is a demographic that like to be in control of everything. And at that moment, I want to get somewhere quickly. I need a taxi. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to get it. I'll go up on the street. Will I be able to hail one? Is it raining? If I call a cab, will it come when it's... And Uber have taken all that away by saying, don't worry, we're going to let you be in control. On our app, you know exactly which taxis are available to you. You're in control of the whole process. And that has taken them from nothing in 2011 to this huge multi-billion dollar company, just through understanding that emotional connection. And the third one, just to illustrate the power of this in different categories, Premier Inn hotels. So they're targeting really business traveler particularly. What's the emotionally important moment that demographic is really concerned about?
Sleep.
Good night's sleep, yeah, exactly. So you want to wake up in the morning. You don't come to a Premier Inn for a luxury stay. You don't care about spas or all that sort of stuff or fluffy dressing gowns. You do care about, I want to wake up in the morning, I'm going to a meeting, I need to be fresh and ready. So Premier Inns have stripped cost out of their hotels. They've invested in the best quality mattresses you can get anywhere. Hypnos mattresses, they are the best around. 4 choices of pillow softness in every room. And their good night guarantee, if you sleep in a Premier Inn hotel, go downstairs the next morning and say, I didn't sleep well, they give you your money back. Because they're that committed to it. And that proposition has taken them from, not much to a dominating market share. So you get my point. These moments exist in every category. And if you can understand those moments and you can build a proposition around them, you will grow. And the brands that do that grow really, really strongly. So, final important point I want to make in this presentation. If it's as simple as that, how come so few companies are doing it? And I would suggest the answer to that is because the tools that we're using to understand consumer motivations don't really work. We use conventional research tools, and conventional research, all the tools that I've been using all my career, do not work in this case. And here's why they don't work. Conventional research, whatever mechanic you're using, basically connects with your conscious brain. It asks rational, considered questions. It asks you to evaluate the answers, think about the answers, and then it takes your responses as the truth. And it isn't that the responses to those questions are ever lies. It's just that they're coming from the part of the brain that isn't making the decisions. And so very often, brands that work really hard to try to understand the motivations of their consumers get it wrong because the tools are not fit for purpose. Now, there are, emerging from the world of neuroscience, new techniques which are able to connect in that way. If I had more time, I'd talk about them, but I won't be able to do it today. And companies are beginning to use them. But this is still not really across the business world, and it's a huge miss, and it's a huge opportunity. Until the business world starts to use tools that can connect with the subconscious drivers of brand choice, we will continue to struggle to build brands that grow. Here's a couple of examples of this. This is a couple of pieces of work that my company did just to illustrate the point I'm making. This is a piece of work we did for an Australian bank. Our client was the blue line, and they were losing share to their competitor. They were running tracking studies, and their tracking studies told them there was no difference in how they were rated to their competitor. And the one on the left, as you look at it, that was their conventional tracking study. We ran the same research using implicit neuroscience-based tools which connected with the subconscious and immediately identified big gaps, which they were just not getting because their tools were wrong. Another piece of work we were involved in, it's not a very good slide, but it was comparing the correlation between expressed purchase intention and actual purchase intention using conventional research tools and implicit research tools. The R-squared correlation using conventional research tools, and this is validated across many studies, is about 30%. We use 0.27 here, it's about 30%. The R-squared correlation when you use implicit tools is over 80%. That is a phenomenal difference. And it makes sense because these tools are connecting with the parts of the brain that make these decisions. But the business world, including me, throughout my career, has been using tools that gave me information which was only likely to be right 1 in 3 times. Is it any wonder that you hear stats like 80% of new product launches fail to achieve their target? It's because we've been using the wrong tools. So, it's not that I'm trashing conventional research. It's really good at telling you what consumers do, but it's really bad at telling you why they do it. And when it comes to positioning your brands and your businesses, you must understand motivations, and conventional research will not give you those answers. It just can't. Oh, another way of saying it, big data is fine, but it doesn't work without brain data to guide it. So, what I say is the business world needs to start thinking differently about the subject of growth. It needs to understand how to become the autopilot in its category if it wants to grow. And here are the 5 things that I would say the business world needs to understand. To cope with complexity, we shop from a small portfolio of autopilot brands. We choose these subconsciously, and we connect emotionally with them, and we're very reluctant to substitute them. In fact, once we've made a choice in every category, they get 75 to 90% of our business. These choices are made at a small number of emotionally important moments, and the key to growth is identifying those moments, understanding how to build a proposition around them, and establishing yourself as the autopilot brand. And if you do that, you will grow. Back to where I started, the presentation started with saying one of the reasons that we all have this problem is because most companies don't focus against the subject of growth in the right way. I told you there's a company that does do that. At least they've got a guy in position. So on a sample of 1, is the theory that if you have somebody focusing against it, you're less likely to make mistakes. Is it borne out? Well, there you are. That's conclusive proof, isn't it? 5 years of growth from Mondelez. That's absolutely slam dunk argument. So finally, things to think about. The things that I would say to any business that really wants to grow is appoint a growth director. Maybe rename your marketing director or your CMO growth director. That's really what they're there to do. But have somebody on your executive team who has accountability and responsibility for this. You must do that. Use neuroscience-based research. Don't throw all your other research tools out, but understand where it can add value and use it. There are lots of companies out there offering it now, but business is not really using them very much. By hook or by crook, identify what those moments are in your category. You can do it with conventional research, much more likely to be successful if you use implicit tools. And once you've identified them, focus on that and develop a proposition that will win at those moments. And if you do that, then you will grow. And if you want to read more about it, then buy this book. And as I said right at the beginning, I've got a few copies to give away. So if you're interested, come and see either me or Sandy, my partner, who will give you these books. Thank you.